Let's Talk Call-In Radio.
This is Let's Talk, getting to the root causes of the important issues of the day. This on-the-air community forum believes your voice matters and welcomes all thoughts and views without judgment. Please join today's conversation by calling 415-663-8492 or 8317. We'd love to hear from you today.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. And when you call 415-663-8492 or 8317, you will hear a little noise, a little buzzy noise as I put you in the system. Please hang on until I say you are on the air, and then turn down your radio. That's to prevent feedback. Give us a name of your choice, and please keep the language clean.
What are we talking about today?
Well, so I read an article.
Reading, watch it.
I read an article. I know reading is a terrible thing, and but it was actually about should we allow beliefs that are obviously nothing to do with fact? Are you entitled to any belief that you have? So that led to the thoughts of, and it mentioned it in the article, ignorance. That there is ignorance, there's willful ignorance, there's lack of seeking for knowledge. There is also the avoidance of knowledge because it doesn't fit your view or your opinion or whatever. And when you come to think about that, it affects everything that humans do, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Except the law, of course, in which ignorance of the law does not excuse the crime.
Yeah.
So if you're ignorant of the law, if you can't go into a court and say, well, I didn't know it was against the law to shoot my neighbor's dog, then they'll say, well, it is against the law and you are going to jail, whatever.
And that seems so unfair, really.
Can we, well, really?
Yeah, I mean, think about how many laws there are.
Yes,
how can we know about all of them?
If you're a citizen of a country, are you not? The point of it is that you are required or expected to understand the spirit of the law, at least. You're not expected, obviously, unless you're a lawyer, to understand the fine print in every regulation, but you are expected to know that killing your neighbor's dog is probably not a great thing, and you will probably get in trouble for doing it. So if that applies to the legal system, why doesn't it apply to everything, especially during these days of climate change denial, which, in my opinion, just my opinion, climate change deniers are being willfully ignorant of the facts.
Well, willful ignorance is a category that famously Thomas Aquinas, I had to do some name dropping for you, came up with. But I think it's really interesting because I think we live in a world in which we think of truth as being socially determined. Truth is whatever we collectively decide is true. And as long as you can maintain that fantasy, then it sort of works.
And it's trending. Truth is trending.
Truth is trending?
Well, I actually, according to the article, there's a philosopher. I've forgotten his name right now because I'm doing other things here. But anyway, he says ignorance is trending.
Well, I looked it up. So this is a great,
willful ignorance.
great new thing. Saw Errol Morris give a talk in Chicago on the internet, and he mentions Google's Ngrams, N-G-R-A-M. You can Google that, and it'll come up the page where you can search the incidence of a word in all of the books they've digitized for the last 200 years. Ignorance had its heyday in terms of incidence of occurrence in text in the early 1800s and the 1820s, and has been in a slow, steady decline. The last big dip was in the early 80s, and it's flatlined. But the use of the term ignorance
But so what's the interpretation of that, though?
People aren't talking about ignorance as much.
I see.
So I looked up
too ignorant to talk about it?
Yeah. Well, I looked at so wage slavery peaked in the 1930s and has been a persistent decline since then. Alienation peaked in the late 60s, early 70s, and has been in decline ever since then. But it's just a neat little thing, not necessarily about our discussion, but I like that. But yeah, I fear that people segregate themselves based on their fantasies about based on their ignorance, really, or willful ignorance, and they want to stay in that world, and they don't want to let contrary voices in. And everybody does this. So we are very fond of accusing, people in Alabama of doing this, people who vote for Donald Trump of doing this, or watch Fox News. But you see this exact same behavior, say in coastal California. It's just that when you compare the two, we tend to agree with more of the elements of the fiction of our neighbors than we do of people, say, in the rural, poor southern states.
Yeah, I think especially willful ignorance, I think, is denying facts, and I think it's all pervading in humanity.
Well, I don't see how you can be ignorant if it's willful. If it's willful, you know.
Yeah, but you know what you don't want to know, and that is a big function in American life. But we're taught not to be curious because curiosity is dangerous, and so we've been, like I say, even very well educated people who live in West Marin have been conditioned to have the same lack of curiosity as the people that they would deride. Well, I'll give you an example. I was at Vision Pond. There was a person there who shall remain nameless. If you're listening, call in though 663-8492 to give your opinion if you can remember this incident. The person sitting by Vision Pond was saying, I just love being in a place untouched by mankind. Okay, Vision Pond, there's
a parking lot there, for one thing.
You take a fire road to get to it. Vision Pond is an old cattle pond that was made by a rancher. I swear I could see an electrical line out of the corner of my eye. And I'm looking at this person, the park is one of the most managed by man spaces in the world.
You're very confused.
I'm very confused.
But is that ignorance, or is it turning a blind eye?
Yeah,
well, that
seeing
person
it differently.
That person wanted to believe something, but it wasn't true. It was false. Oh,
where you're plugged in, turn the thing. There you go. Hello,
I think
Shelley.
you're talking about a fantasy.
Well, hello,
Someone
Shelley.
just
well, no, that person believed it.
imagines himself.
I guess that's better. Yeah, I hear it better
You
now.
could say it, but this is somebody who is saying that in a space that was created completely by man, but had this opposite view, which many people do about the park.
We have a caller. Hi,
Hooray.
caller. You're on the air. What's your name, please?
Good morning. It's Mary Catherine of Seattle calling.
MK.
And whoever, Charles, I love you.
I love you too.
For using curiosity, because I've been thinking about this ever since I read that thing yesterday on Facebook about what you're going to be talking about today. And that is that I think we've gotten really lazy, and curiosity is dangerous politically, I guess. But my training as a teacher was to develop materials for the children to use about things that they were interested in. And since I'm a very curious person, it worked great for me. For instance, my son, Ian, went into a pond and came out with leeches all over his legs. And everybody freaked out and screamed and yelled and jumped up and down. But then I did a unit on leeches, and we even had a leech tank at our house for a while, watched them leech around until one day they suspiciously by my hand went off and joined the rest of the critters in the ditch. But anyway, things like that, and how can I think that the internet is wonderful and all, but it's so easy to find out things. You don't have to try very hard, and I think a laziness develops when we don't have to. We're not challenged to find out about our world, because how can you live in a world that you don't understand?
Yeah, it's a lot easier. It's easier. That's why.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's the easy way.
Not in the long run, though, boy. We're going to get it.
Well, somebody
exactly.
So somebody is going to get it, and I think that is the real danger here. Is that it's very easy for us, say, in a place like West Marin, to live in fantasies that we create for ourselves, and that's what most people do, and not just here. But who suffers? Where is the impact of that? So I'd say, look at all the wars that are over resources that we consume or we benefit as owners or shareholders of corporations that need those resources or manage those resources. So when I see a group of people, say, in Point Reyes National Seashore, you can see Wall Street. You can see a bombed-out village in Iraq. And you can also see Vietnam. You can see Korea. And you can see the Second World War. It's all there.
Not to mention Yemen, which nobody seems to want to hear about
or
know about.
So there's a history that, I learned something in KWMR, and I just like to compliment KWMR for this reason. I was in the lobby. It wasn't on air, of course. I wasn't speaking. And this guy who was a psychologist and a therapist, described a pretty common concept, which is the double bind, right? You're being asked to do something that if you do it, you get punished, even though you're told you have to do this. And he used this example of children in a family, not universally true, but the oldest is supposed to get the best grades and be the most responsible and do the best in school. But you tell...
Yeah.
You tell the second child, though, that they have to get A's, too. They also have to do well in school. But they know that if they, maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, they know if they outperform the eldest, that it will upset the family dynamic because the eldest is supposed to do the best, and if you outperform them, it has distorted the relationship between the parents and the children and each other. So this is an example of this double bind. You're being asked to get the top grades, just like your elder sibling, but you know that if you do, it's going to cause tension within the family. He said something very interesting about that simple concept. He said, knowledge that you are in the double bind does not reduce your anxiety. It heightens it. So this is the dangerous thing about knowing the truth. Knowing the truth...
It heightens it up to a point, because I'm a second child with an older National Merit Scholar's sister. And I went through this whole thing and learned to look out the window and draw and do stuff like that. And, damn, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, you're talking about being the second sibling and...
Well, right.
But just this idea of...
I don't know that it created tension in the family, but maybe it did.
Well, I'm saying...
It's a very long time to realize that when you're in this position where nothing you do is going to be it's going to be good enough or right enough, then you can do anything you want because it's going to be wrong anyway. So you do this enormous freedom.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think that the point that and this happened by degrees. I mean, I was born when the Cold War still existed, and the Cold War had a huge impact on what Americans were allowed to think and not think. To the point that when I talk to people who were alive during the 1970s, can you imagine? They talk about you couldn't even talk about capitalism because to be able to discuss capitalism meant that there could be a critique of capitalism.
Right.
So forget about talking about socialism, communism, or anarchism, or some other ideology. Even talking about the dominant ideology was considered subversive. I mean, it's very interesting. But the Cold War really cooked.
When was this?
They said this was the 70s. This is our neighbors in Tamaulipas. Here in the United States. And they were in West Marin at that time. So a deeply, deeply conservative country. And you're not allowed.
So you were curtailed in your right to explore. You were curtailed in knowledge. Well, you're meant to be ignorant because ignorance in a population is always easier for the governing body.
Sure, and not wanting to stand out, being afraid to stand separate from the crowd. Something I do blithely now, but I can tell you, I have had the same anxiety about being different that everybody has. I just couldn't see myself fitting in, so I didn't. So I dropped out of high school, and I've always, kind of been that way.
And it's been down ever since.
If you fit in with those people, you would have been miserable anyway, because
yes.
Why bother?
Yeah,
it takes a long time to get there.
No, those group dynamics are really poisonous because it is about controlling what can be said and who can say it. But this is, again, could be an unconscious process in which nobody is saying you have to think this or don't think that. It's that people do it, they naturally respond to it.
Right. Where do we learn that? Because I can relate that to myself, too, not in terms of academic achievement in social achievement. My older brother was very awkward socially, and somehow I felt in certain situations I had to hold myself back. Otherwise,
you'd overshadow him?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Was he was your older brother?
Yeah.
Well, again, he's supposed to be the leader, right? He's the first, and so if you take the lead, it humiliates that understanding.
Well, this explains everything about my family.
I thought you're not the eldest.
You know, I
you're
like to
brother.
talk about stereotypes, though, because that seems to me a really common form of ignorance, the way we stereotype, because we really are drawing conclusions about people really based on some very shallow experiences.
Ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Absolutely.
Which stereotypes offend you?
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's. I think that's true of most stereotypes. They're easy to. It's easy to put people in boxes when you don't know enough about them. You just say, "Oh, well, he's
those people."
It seems to me that
wearing a turban. He must be a terrorist."
It seems to me that people have something to gain by it, which is why they do it, and it doesn't necessarily.
Comfort.
Yeah, it isn't necessarily directly related to the stereotype. I mean, just the stuff about immigration today. I think that they've talked about numerous. The whole generation feels they've been left out by the economic transformation that's taking place. So if we've been left out, we got somebody else that we're actually going to kick out.
Right. Yeah. Scapegoating is a wonderful thing.
Shelley, did you say comfort?
I did. Thanks for noticing.
Right. You're right. That's good.
Right. Because it's easier to generalize, and it's easier to communicate with others about other people by generalizing. But
we have another problem that has risen in the last 40 years, which is the belief in the market as a supercomputer that will discover the truth and tell you the truth. And so you see what a cul-de-sac the thought gets into, because if the market doesn't select something, it means that it isn't good. And so the voices that we don't hear, it's because what they're saying is wrong, in essence. And people have internalized that to a really strong degree. I mean, I'm that way when I hear an outrageous claim that is outside of, say, what the New York Times would accept or the Wall Street Journal would accept, or, whatever reference point you have. It's a little, shocking and unnerving, but we're become much more narrow, I think, in terms of what outside sort of ideas we will accept. And if you're not a successful person, it means that your ideas are bad. Like, I'm a poor guy, so that must mean I'm wrong for some reason. Poor guy, relatively speaking. That must mean my ideas are incorrect. There's a real feeling, maybe that's much older than what I'm talking about. I mean, there's always been certainly in the Protestant era, a feeling that poverty means
the echo chamber, but the echo chamber effect, right, where you only want to hear what conforms it's with your thinking or how you've already been molded.
A selective set of facts.
Which is
alternatives.
A form of ignorance in it.
Well, I had a saying.
Or willful ignorance.
I got this from Charles Schultz. Paul always loves it when I reference where I get things from, which is wealth in America means never having to be asked a question that you wouldn't want to answer. It's not that you reject the question. It's that wealth insulates you from ever having to encounter those kinds of questions.
Oh, boy, I got to question that.
But
I just want to go back just one step. Really, when you say in the capitalist system, when you're talking about not permitted, what you say, I got to pick it up. But I think that ideas need to be marketed, just to use your market.
Why?
Well, I'm saying that we believe something. You're saying the marketplace rewards what's true and what isn't.
Well, this is an ideology.
It's a failure
I'm not saying
of marketing, really.
So the people who are telling the truth just don't have a good enough PR campaign?
That's right.
Absolutely.
They haven't effectively communicated that idea to the people.
Absolutely true in this day.
No, I don't think so, because the thing is that things that are superficial but attractive will always trump things that are complex and difficult on those terms.
That word.
Oh, no.
Always trump. Oh, yeah, but I'm saying that if on the base of a pleasing idea, who is going to read the difficult novel or the enjoyable one? Who's going to want to live in in next to the refinery in Richmond or next to the park in West Marin.
Right. Anything that's easier, anything that conforms with what your desires are, or what you've been told your desires
or
are.
isn't threatening.
Well, climate change is a great example of
Yes.
this. I mean, what is easier to believe, that we're causing climate change or that we're not causing climate change?
Right.
Much easier to believe that we're not causing.
And so that is the part of this.
Mr. Contrary here.
Daniel R. Di Nicola is the guy whose article I read, and he's written a book called Understanding Ignorance, and really the basis of it that spurred him to do it. He's a professor, but so he's always teaching. But this is something that got him was this climate change denial is going to affect everyone in the world, because the less we do, the slower we do anything, the more people, the more species are affected. And is there a time when, your belief that climate change, human-caused climate change is not real, should that be allowed anymore?
Well, I'll tell you something. That we've been watching Ken Burns' Vietnam series here in Seattle, and I was busy during that time being young and having children and driving around in my Mercedes and living in the Hamptons, and being a dope and being ignorant. And there's a piece, Abby Hoffman is quoted in that piece, and I'm telling you, it rings so true of what, exactly the same attitudes and things that are happening now. Exactly the same.
Well, I think we have to talk about. We have to talk also about disavowing things that you know to be true. So, like, everybody in Marin almost believes in climate change. Has that changed their behavior in any way?
We're still driving cars.
Still flying.
Right.
The flying is the killer for me.
Right.
Well, I do have one neighbor, they gave up flying. But, and I've given up flying years ago because it's
hard on your arms.
Because you don't want to lay out the money for that train. Too expensive.
It is too expensive.
Nobody's going to buy you the ticket.
Well, no, actually, that's not true. Lots of people have offered to fly me to Europe, and we talked about this here before.
Anywhere.
Oh, yeah, getting
They'll
you
fly
away from
anywhere.
here.
Well, no, that's when I moved.
One-way tickets.
When I moved out here, so that's what somebody said to me. It's an Irish fellow said, "Charlie, you didn't select that place. It wouldn't let you live anywhere else." But I'm just saying to know something is also can be very superficial. People know climate change is happening. Does that change their behavior? Does it change?
Well,
what they're doing?
that's the whole point of this show, which is willful ignorance.
I'm going to
Really.
get off. I'll talk to you guys.
Thank you, MK. Thank you for calling. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Right, take care, MK. And 663-8492. And if somebody's on the line, you can always call 663-8317.
What about my eyes shifting back and forth?
What?
It's good radio, by the way.
Yeah, I know. That's why I had to describe it. What about government imposed ignorance?
Yes.
Well, but I think banning, like, not believing in climate change,
Yes.
what does it matter? People believe in climate change, don't do anything about it. But remember, in America, it is not a crime to be a bigot, nor should it be a crime to be a bigot. You are free to have nasty views in this country. And
has the time come where that is not acceptable anymore?
I think that would be crazy, because, look, you wouldn't actually solve...
How far do you take free
I think
speech?
it's acceptable, personally.
Well, but that's not solving...
I think it's acceptable to think whatever you want, but it's not acceptable when your thoughts start to affect other people.
Well,
I think it's.
but
I agree with you on climate change, but I think.
but bigotry affects other people.
I could believe anything I want about God, but when I start applying that to other people and saying you can do this or you can't do this based on my beliefs, that's when that belief system starts being important.
But you
can go home and believe anything you want as long as you're not beating your children. That's
Don't you want to
I
beat your
believe
children
that beating
sometimes?
children is a good thing.
Sparing the rod.
Well, but I mean, this is the thing. Well, Stephen, what you're saying is that nobody should have the ability to force you to say one thing rather than another thing, and I think that is true. Nobody should force you to say one thing rather than another thing. And we talk about bigotry. If you want to look at the sources of bigotry, which are inequality, and they're economic, and they're political, and they're historical, we could do that. But forcing people to say the right thing, not the wrong thing, simply, pretends as though the problem was in the language itself. And this actually does get back to ignorance. I mean, this is like Wittgenstein's claims, right? More names.
He was a beery swine.
He was a beery swine.
He could drink you under the table.
A philosopher from the first half of the 20th century, that there isn't any sort of real or reality or truth that exists outside of us. It's all constructed from within ourselves. Now, if you believe that, then it would be very important to force people to use these words and not those words. That would actually change what is real. But I hate that. I hate that idea because I think that there is a truth or a reality that exists outside of myself that is difficult to know but knowable. And what it tells me is that language isn't the source of these kinds of problems. It's actual a story about inequality. It's a story about economics. It's a story about politics.
It's ignorance.
Basically,
I mean, to be a bigot means that you are ignorant of the fact that all human beings are human beings and have the same value.
Actually, I think bigotry might be a more wise default position. To hate humanity rather than to love it might actually be objectively.
Well, if you're hating all humanity, that's not bigotry, is it? That's just self-hating human.
Fair enough.
You're not going to make many friends that way either.
Well, you make lots of friends with bigotry. What are you talking about?
That's right. Shelley brought up something different, and that's this willful attempt by to keep people ignorant by the government or by political powers. Reducing funding to the schools. Ignorant people are easy to manipulate. I think that, politically there is a big advantage to certain powers to keep people. Isn't that what you're talking about, Shelley?
Well, I wasn't really thinking about that, but that's true. I am more thinking about things that are hidden from us, things that are going on, being done, choices being made, decisions that are hidden from us because we can't handle the truth.
We don't,
according to them.
Right. I wonder how much of that actually goes on, or if it's just that they... I don't know.
Like in our military, for example.
Right, yeah.
Well, we don't celebrate
but it seems
truth
like
tellers.
there's incuriosity is regarded as a useful thing for Americans, especially. Excuse me, I'm being very bigoted here. But no, incuriosity is what's being promulgated. They don't want educated people. They don't want an education system that actually makes their students curious to learn more.
Right.
Gives them the
don't want to
impetus to learn
question
more.
authority.
They don't want them to know that they are ignorant of many things, because that ignorance would be an impetus to actually learn something, to go and find something and go, oh, I didn't know that.
Right.
Maybe there's something else I don't know. That is anathema to politics, and to capitalism and politics, and especially corrupt politics as we have now. But we don't want to think about, because we're going to go vote. Right? We're still going to go vote, even though we know it's a corrupt political system that's run by corporations and very rich people.
I think you're so ignorant of...
Stephen, you just... anything that's like bad
on.
News, you say, that's not really true. You sit here and disavow every sort of bad thing. No.
Well, when he says that that capitalism does not wants people to be ignorant, I think that it thrives on people... if you don't have intelligent people, educated people, then certainly if you're a pharmaceutical company, you want those people on your team. You don't want ignorant people coming to work for you. You want curious people.
They're going to make robots to do all that stuff.
Highly educated,
researchers.
Curious people.
I don't know what curious.
Talking about capitalism. I'm just saying, in general, businesses thrive by having educated people that know what's going on in the world.
Theoretically.
They don't thrive by having uneducated dumb people.
But look at what the pharmaceutical industry has offered us over the last 30 years. Things to help you get an erection, things that...
Well, that's it. That's intentions, though. That's different.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, yes, there is a need for specialist knowledge, but that's different from being curious.
Did you really mean that when you said they just give us something to...
Well, that's the biggest selling thing apart from opioids is Viagra,
and SSRIs,
which,
so they...
I'm leaving. I can't stand it.
Because, Stephen, anytime anything challenges your worldview, you immediately reject it.
Oh, we have a call. Was that a flash?
It was a flash of light.
Which line? There you go.
Line
Caller,
one.
Just hang on for a moment. I just have to do this. This is KWMR 90.5 FM in Point Reyes Station, 89.9 Bolinas, 92.3 San Geronimo Valley. KWMR's programming is brought to you by our listener members, our monthly calendar club supporters, and by the Pacific Sun, Marin's Art and News Weekly, online at pacificsun.com. Support for KWMR is also provided by the Point Reyes Light, Light, an independent and locally owned newspaper telling Westmoreland's stories since 1948, featuring award-winning reporting, essays, opinions, a community events calendar, and the sheriff's calls. Office and newsroom open Monday through Thursday in downtown Inverness. Subscription, classifieds, calendar, and advertising information, plus letter to the editor forms are available at ptreyslight.com. That's PTREYES light.com or at 415-669-1200. And we're also supported by Westmoreland Food and Farm Tours, offering culinary adventures in the Point Reyes area. Trips include local history, behind-the-scenes tours, and tastings of cheese, wine, oysters, grass-fed meats, pastries, produce, and more. Details available online at foodandfarmtours.com. That's foodandfarmtours.com. And caller, you are on the air. What's your name, please?
Sean.
Sean, hi.
Hi, I'm calling from Oakland, and find your conversation very interesting, actually, about the willful ignorance, or is it what is going on here in America. It's been many, many years, I think, that we've been quite apathetic and satiated as a middle class. One moment, I'm putting headphones on.
Excellent.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yep. So since Bernie Sanders came into the game a couple years ago and threw his name into the hat, I got really quite obsessed with the media and with politics and stuff, and started digging into the internet and looking for alternate sources of media, going through even the history of media, and I ended up finding, like a lot of great sources and resources online. Some from Pacifica Radio, some from Baltimore, the Real News Network, and I even went into other state-sponsored television like RT in China, and just trying to keep an open mind and see the big picture and whatnot. And I just started realizing how much, everything is biased. Giving us
point.
Everything is giving us their version of the story. Even NPR has biases towards candidates, I believe, and I have friends who are NPR reporters who agree with me. And, I just think that I ultimately had this full-on worldview change to just realize that we're all under this great spell of propaganda, depending on where your bubble is in the world. I came from suburban Detroit, and I moved out here out west, and I was in quite a culture shock when I came to Oakland. Even though it was very familiar, it was like Detroit with palm trees, I liked it a lot, and I was very into it because it actually resonated more with my heart in terms of activism and speaking out than Detroit is, because Detroit is like a very segregated place. Where I grew up, I was in, a white neighborhood, grew up Catholic in conservative neighborhoods, and all I knew about colored people was what white people told me about them, right? So even though we were right there next to each other, it was just you didn't talk to them. And I joined the military, and that's where I kind of started to, break down my walls. But I realized, my heart would pound when I would talk to people of color, because I just never had experienced them. I was worried about the wrong thing. And so as I grew up and kept growing and expanding, now I've traveled a lot around the world. I've become my jobs have been in the travel industry here in the Bay Area, and going around, touring around America and showing people from around the world. And I just hear all these different stories and their own worldviews. And, I met a woman from Madrid who doesn't quite understand the Catalan plight, and it's just all a matter of, I think that we're all under the spell of the bubble that we grow up in. And until you go out and travel and you get some world experience, you can't understand the perspective of another person or another idea. And in America, we don't travel much, it's very, only on the coast do people kind of know and go around and explore the West. But in the heartland of America, I'm going to generalize here and say we just don't get out of our country, and go, and even if we do, it's only for like up to 2 weeks, which really isn't enough time to take in a culture and a vibe of a new way of living or a different way of living or a different religion, to understand that it's relative, that we're all kind of in the same thing, but doing it our own way.
Hey, you should be on this program. It's so well said.
Well, I grew up in Michigan as well, actually, so I've some affinity for that remark. But you were going to say something, Shelley. Pardon me.
Well, I'm just bringing it back to the ignorance factor, I guess. And do you think, can people help being ignorant
if they don't travel?
Well,
my perspective, get out of the bubble.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think without travel, I mean, you can do something. But Caller, you were speaking. Sorry.
Well, my perspective after all this is that, like, I have ultimate forgiveness for people because I know that I have changed and I know what I came from, but I also know what they're up against, And we have to always maintain that open heart and that open communication with them. The resistance effort, I think, is a little bit like you're going to get what you give. What resists persists, and even like it doesn't make sense, but to keep an open heart and an open mind to have a conversation with someone, even if they're doing something so hateful as something white supremacist or this hate speech and stuff. That's the only way the conversation is going to continue to happen, to allow for someone to change their own mind, because you can't change somebody's mind. People told me when I was 19 or 20, like, oh, the media lies to you and the president lies, and I literally didn't believe it. My answer was, that's illegal. They can't do that, And
well, it's been a big change for me. I've sort of gotten to the place where I really don't care to change somebody's mind anymore. What I really want to do is mobilize myself and others that we agree with. There's so much to be done just with people that you agree, that to spend all this energy trying to change someone's mind who's already fixed and
but that wouldn't keep you from joining a discussion with them, perhaps, if you met someone.
A discussion is one thing, but getting in a really heated...
so maybe rather than trying to change their mind, it might be trying to understand how they came to hold that perspective.
Yes.
Well, I don't even, but I mean, like, there are limits to that. I don't need to understand how, somebody became enthusiastic about Nazism. It's like, the old line about, a stranger or an enemy is just someone whose motivations you don't understand. I don't really need to know much about Himmler's motivations, to be honest. I mean, so there's a line there. I would say if there's one thing, if you can't travel because you can't afford it.
That wasn't extreme, though, by the way. This talk about Himmler.
It was slightly extreme.
Right.
The one thing you can do without traveling, if you don't have the money to go to Europe for months and months and months or years, is you have to be able to imagine yourself as the villain in the story. You have to be able to imagine yourself as capable of doing bad things. This is something Americans and all people to some extent have trouble with. Sure. De Tocqueville 170 years ago said, as our friend in Tamales, a French friend in Tamales likes to repeat, was shocked how Americans need to be complimented all the time. And then, of course, we have Thumper's mother who says, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But I'm saying, if you have to be able to see yourself as capable of victimizing other people and being the bad guy. If you can do that, then you can think about have a complex relationship to the world and to history and to.
I think that's very good to see yourself as the villain in a discussion about ethics or about politics or whatever. To put yourself in the position of not being righteous. Yes. To put yourself in a position of being open and
I think it's hard for Americans also to do that. They were raised in a way with, part of our culture is American exceptionalism, and this manifest destiny and everything. It goes right back to our roots,
right.
Of the Pilgrims and the Puritans, that they were chosen. I just heard it on, when Mike Pompeo was with being, in front of Congress.
What a great move this is.
He actually said the difference between America doing propaganda and KGB or CIA stuff and Russia doing it was that America was exceptional, that it's okay for us to do it because we're doing it for the good, And
Except, of course, it was just the language they were doing it in.
Well, Dick Cheney put out a book called Exceptional.
Yeah.
Let me bring the other caller on the line. Hello, other caller. You're on the air. What's your name, please?
Hi, guys. This is Hal at Marconi. How are you?
Hey,
Howdy, Hal.
I got in a little late, so I wondered, if you had touched on the ideas of how anyone with a notion of something can now find in the media evidence support to back up this notion.
Yes.
And how that often kind of displaces investigation.
Sure.
Well, we deal with another problem, which is scale. Right? How do you know people you have never met, will never meet, are your representatives in Congress? Right? When was the last time we were all hanging out with Nancy Pelosi?
To bring that up was the Tea Party.
Yeah, and I think they have a great point. I think the Tea Party actually has lots of interesting points. Of course, we dismiss them out of hand,
We're
right?
finally seeing their agenda.
And enters into that as well, especially with that group.
So, but the other thing is that we live in this world in which reality is mediated by screens, and on the level of looking at a screen, a person saying, I'm a good guy who's actually a bad guy, and a person saying, I'm a good guy who is a good guy,
How can you tell?
There is no way to tell the difference between the two of them. And again, so what we've done is we've allowed, this is an empire, right?
I can, by the way.
Yeah, Stephen can. So if you have any questions, call Stephen. But on this, when you have an empire, it starts to distort reality in this way, and so we live in these distortions because we imagine ourselves as one of 300 million Americans, or one of a party that represents half the country.
And perhaps we're not willing to put in the effort to investigate and find out what's really going on, or how you would be able to do that.
It takes a lot of
How
effort.
you would be able to do that. I mean, you stop at what makes you feel good.
Yeah, well, I can tell you,
point.
if Hillary Clinton had been elected president, we'd be having much different conversations because that is
Not on this show.
Not on this show. Well, because that is what most people wanted. Oh, I can go back to sleep again. Fine. The manager of the empire looks nice rather than mean, says nice rather than mean, and then let's worry about what oysters we're having and my linen pants back from the cleaners. West Marin issues. And so
You
now,
live here too, Charles. Come on.
I do. It can suffer one critic, don't you think, Shelley?
Unless not.
I love my linen
suffering.
pants.
Let's not
Talk
forget
about
that.
ignorance of West Marin.
One last point.
Yes.
Thank you, Hal.
Something I've noticed, I don't know how long it's been going on, but when was the last time you, in a conversation, that, and especially on the news, when they put a microphone in somebody's face, where someone said, "You know what? I don't know the answer."
Long
Seem
time.
to have an opinion that we're going to consider informed whether it is or not.
Well, this is the thing, because our model for the politician now is an expert manager, and the expert must have an answer, because if they don't have an answer, why are they the manager?
Why are
isn't
they
somebody
on
else?
TV? I mean, why bother?
Why isn't somebody else in that role? But you get that, right down to the very lowest levels of the economy in our life, this belief that you have to present yourself as an expert, and the expert must know the answer, because if they don't, why are they getting paid? So I encounter that a lot.
That's why we're all on this show.
That's why I'm getting paid. Anyway, thank you so much, Hal.
Sure.
Thank you, Hal. And Sean, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so how do we find out? How do we instill in the populace in general the will to find out information beyond the bubble?
Marketing.
Well, criticism. No, not
Really,
marketing.
you promote ideas.
That's crazy. But, because marketing is the source of our problem.
Promote ideas.
Well,
I agree with that. I
thank
think
you, Sean.
the internet is a great tool, and at least the next generations are really, they're handy with that. And I talked to a lot of young people today. On some of my tours, I had a group of 20-somethings, and I was really blown away to the awareness that they had actually of the system and what was going on, and even to the, the average daily propaganda and stuff. So I don't know if it's something that we do, of course with purpose, we try to enlighten people and make them aware of things, but this whole show that's happening right now with Donald Trump, I think part of the, seeing the bright side of things is it's making people aware. He's basically, to me, he is Toto pulling the curtain back and revealing the wizard, because it made me look, and I learned what a superdelegate was, and I'm 47, I had to figure out the Electoral College because it was just vague to me, and I grew up, my high school days were in the 80s, and I just glazed over it, and I trusted what was happening for so many years,
Yeah.
And, I realized, oh, wow, now I realize this whole two-party system, the way it's built and how they keep the other parties out, that's like a measure of control. And the superdelegate, another measure of control.
And why do you have Southern primaries first? It was a reaction to McGovern becoming the nominee in 72. So why is South Carolina so early in the Democratic primary system? So you can get rid of lefties.
Exactly. It's all like, and I start to realize that. So the upcoming midterm elections are coming, and I'm not giving up on the system. I'm going to vote.
So, Sean, how do you sort?
Are important. The primaries are where you get in there and make a difference if we can.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you how you sort through the information, because it sounds like you've done a lot of looking from a lot of different angles. When you come up across something that hits you as, well, this perspective is so extreme that this is spun in a way that can't really be true. But how can you recognize that? Like, how do you sort it out?
Well, the thing is, I really went deep for like 2.5 years, and I was watching mostly like independent news shows, starting with Democracy Now! And from watching Democracy Now!, I started seeing return journalists who were saying things that resonated or that I thought, were true. And I'd go and, like, on a certain subject, go and look up different sources and then compare what other pundits or news sources were saying. I got to admit, I barely ever touch the mainstream media. I have, like, my webpage opens up and I read all the headlines. But the mainstream media is run by,
like one company.
And it's 6 companies. It used to be 50. It's like 6 now. And it's all big money interests. Like, the commercials are for Lockheed Martin and all that stuff and other companies. And, so what I do know is that the general narrative coming out of the mainstream media, whether it's right or left, it's not the absolute truth. There's a lot more to the story. So you have to dig more to find the truth. And I think independent news sources online are where I go for those. As well as I really do like RT America because, for one, they were scapegoated so bad, it made me look even harder into it. And what I found out is there are a lot of great old mainstream media personalities and reporters who ended up working there because they were either fired for not wanting to tell the truth, or like Ed Schultz, Chris Hedges, even Larry King has 2 programs on RT, and these are people who just weren't going to toe the line. And and they're Americans. They're working in America for the state-sponsored, broadcast of Russia, and they have to, sign up as foreign agents.
Well, RT will give you a great view on the United States. It won't give you that great a view into Russian society.
Of course, that's everything has a bias, But
but then, if you want to know about America, go to its critics.
Exactly, they don't have to lie to make up a crazy story.
Well, I think.
I agree with what you're saying. Like, there are tons of news shows on RT that are just basic propaganda and stuff, but that's what media is.
Well, Sean, if you're aware enough to be able to tell the difference.
Well, I was going to ask Sean, because I think he brought this up, and he's talking about this process of coming to realize these things. One of my favorite things is said on KWMR 50 million times, which is the difference between Václav Havel and Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera is the patron saint of West Marin, and he wrote a book called The Unbearable Lightness of Being, in which he said Soviet domination of the Czech Republic will go on unending for 100 years. And 5 years after he published that book, it ended. Havel they hated each other. They fought in the press right through the 70s. Kundera left the country to go to France so he could live a groovy lifestyle. Havel, who was not a saint himself, but he stayed and became the first president of an independent Czechoslovakia. Havel was saying the experience of realizing that he was a privileged member of a repressive society back in the 60s in Czechoslovakia was humiliating. And what Kundera says is that humiliation is useless. It is just going to make you unhappy. And if you resist, the state is going to imprison you and your family members, maybe kill you, maybe torture your friends. There's no point to encountering that humiliation. Havel was saying at first he was humiliated. He realized he had to push through his own humiliation at realizing the part he played, even if a very small part, in the running of this repressive society, or how the smoothness in which it operated. And I think that's really essentially the problem we have. And I think it is a philosophical problem. Like I say, Wittgenstein is saying that reality is what you perceive. It doesn't have any life outside of your experience. So if you can come up with a fantasy that makes you happy, that's wisdom. I mean, and that's what Kundera is saying as well.
So how does that fit in with ignorance? So you're making it relative.
That's willful ignorance.
Well, no, I'm saying that,
I mean, that's a way of using. You know that things are the way they are, but you choose to ignore it. That's the other meaning of ignorance, of course, is ignoring things.
When people treat depression, and people who make unpleasant statements, whatever, as a kind of mental illness, a deep philosophical error, because if there is no objective reality, then why are you bothering yourself with this stuff? Enjoy the cheese. And that's why people love Milan Kundera and don't know who Václav Havel is. But I'm saying is that, people listening to this, I think it was with Sean's experiences, when you encounter how false your image of the world was, that there was truths that you were not aware of that were completely contrary to what you'd been indoctrinated to believe, that is very humiliating. And people avoid the humiliation. They do not want to deal with how wrong.
And in Sean's case, as in your case, that was done by traveling beyond the United States. It certainly helped you, Charles, even though you decry travel now.
I think when you're young it makes sense.
It certainly broadened the worldview. How can it not?
When you're young, I think we should just have a rule that after you're 25, you cannot get on an airplane. But no, what I'm saying, also history helped me. So I had the experience of having a father that was a political refugee and a mother that was an American from a lot of interesting strains in American history. And so my own interest in who are these people and where did they come from allowed me to learn quite a bit. So being interested in your own past, warts and all, is a worthy thing.
It must have been fun having around the breakfast table, looking up, who are these people? Who
are you?
Yeah, I mean,
why are you in charge of me?
I don't know how good a job they did with that. Anyway,
Sean, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, guys. I really appreciated sharing with you in this conversation.
Thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks
wonderful.
For calling.
Try it again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, fabulous. Please do call again, Sean. N 663-8492.
Or 8317.
Or 8317.
What about this whole notion of ignorance in terms of what it who does it benefit and who's threatened by it? I think that's a big factor. Plus, besides the thing that ignorance is way easier than,
ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
Who wants to know?
But the benefits, for example, talking about climate change, I think that obviously the fossil fuel industry benefits. So people that really, have. If I'm from Oklahoma, I may not believe in climate change. It might be.
You got a job at the fracking.
Well, it might be threatening to my re-election.
Well, I'll tell you, it's even darker than that. I think that you'll find is people will say, just like the people believe in climate change, it doesn't change the behavior here. I'm sure you find plenty of educated people in the oil industry who say, yes, climate change is happening. This is how I get paid.
Exxon.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They know it's happening, but even they would continue to, because that's how they get paid. I mean, I think in the 70s in the Soviet Union were called the years of stagnation. And I think everybody knew that the system was falling apart. Nobody could imagine how it could be changed. That is what empire does to the imagination. And I think we live in the same condition now. Everybody knows that something has got to change and that the way we survive today is a catastrophe that has to is breaking down and has to change. But we feel powerless.
So what's the antidote? What's the solution? Just to wrap up the next.
I have the solution.
For 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes to come up with the solution for willful ignorance.
Right. No, you take the really important decisions about resources and how resources are used and where they come from, and you put those onto a local level so that you can go to a public meeting in your neighborhood and figure out where energy and your water and your food is coming from and have that debate. Right now, and this was a hallmark of the Cold War, all of those questions were removed from public consideration. And so this is Herbert Marcuse wrote One-Dimensional Man about this, is that people get it. They get and have for generations now, we are not involved with the question of where the stuff comes from. We just do our job and we get a little bits of money and then we buy stuff.
Part of the urbanization of the West, certainly.
And industrialization. Right. So take those questions of like, where does our electricity come from and make them local things that are controlled locally. We have that to an extent. Marin Clean Energy has 3 meetings every month. You can go to all 3. You can speak on every issue. I did that for 6 months, and it was an empty room. So people will wail about climate change. Did you see the new climate change documentary? Leonardo DiCaprio made me cry. Whatever. Do they go to those meetings? No. They like the passion play. They like the emotional arc of thinking about the end of the world, but not actually doing something about it. Sure.
Well, it's hard. Have some compassion.
No.
Charles.
Have compassion.
Yeah, that's what the torturer wants. Compassion. I'm a nice guy.
Oh, boy. Well, I just wanted to throw this out there that when we're on the internet doing our searches and reading statements, to take it to the next level and find out more about who is making that statement and, what is their position. Because, like Sean was saying, everybody who writes something is writing from their personal perspective or for their own, agenda. And so it's important to know a little bit of that backstory, I think, when we read things.
Well, I think humans are, I think it's part of their thing to be willfully ignorant now. 21st century humans.
Well,
there's so much.
Our president.
How can you know everything?
But like I said, that's what I say. This starts to distort reality because we're thinking about not our, the place that we live, which I daren't call community. We're thinking about what's happening in Washington D.C., what's happening on the other side of the world. Yeah. That's a place of extraction of imagination. But you see people's emotional desire. They take Holocaust deniers. A lot of that is emotionally motivated not by hatred of Jews, but a desire not to see yourself as such a terrible villain, to be free of the villainy of having to do it if you're a German Gentile or whatever.
Austrians are lovely people.
Yeah, they don't want to believe
fathom.
it.
Like, there's nothing to believe. It's not a belief.
That maybe it was a bad example. I'm saying people desire not to see themselves as the villains, and Americans are the same way. We've just been
doing my job. You understand?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we kill how many millions of people we killed since the end of the war?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and let's not forget Yemen again. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you to our callers and listeners. And KWMR does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. Yes. And we'll be back next week. Bye for now.